of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations. Pursuant to order of reference of Wednesday, September 23, 2020, the committee is meeting on its study of Canada-China relations. Il s'agit d'une réunion.
This is a hybrid meeting pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on the 25th of January 2021.
Witnesses, I'd like to inform committee members that 30 minutes has been set aside at the end of today's meeting to discuss committee business, including the subcommittee report, which essentially contains the draft work plan regarding the national security dimensions of the Canada-China relationship. By the way, of course, since we're going to have bells at 8 o'clock, what I'll do is see if there's unanimous consent to keep going until 8:15 to have some discussion of that subcommittee report. I would now like to welcome the witnesses. Rob Stewart, Deputy Minister, Public Safety Canada. Brenda Lucky, Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. John Osowski, President of the Canada Border Services Agency. David Vigneault, Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Shelley Bruce, Chief of the Communications Security Establishment. And Scott Jones, Head of the Canadian Centre for Cyber Security. Merci à tous d'être.
Thank you all for being with us this evening.
Any opening remarks, as tonight's discussion is a continuation of our last meeting with the Minister. Alors, on va commencer.
So I would like to begin with our first round, and for 6 minutes, Mr. Paulus. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll begin with Mr. Vigneault for my questions. In your speech that you made on the 9th of February, you said that the current act allows your institution to give advice, and also to the government, but also to key partners. And from the witness from the university said there wasn't so much interaction. So is this one of the problems with the legislation? Is there something that prevents you to speak directly to university rectors? Thank you for your question, Mr. Paulus. I would say that there are a few important points on that. First of all, we work very narrowly with universities on different levels. Yes, the rectors, but also people who are responsible for research and development. We also work with organizations such as U15, which is a group of the biggest universities working on research and development, to give them advice and opinions. The problem is that the CSIS Act, Section 19 of it, means that we cannot reveal any classified information outside of the government to entities outside of the government. So we provide them with information, we give them intelligence, and we guide them. But there is indeed a certain limit to what we can provide as information to the universities. Well, you say that you give information to the government. Could the government transmit that information? Does it have to remain secret and confidential? And people just are left wondering. Well, what we do at that point, Mr. Paulus, is that secrets are not shared. But what it allows us to do is us to give them some areas where they could work on, or areas that we might want to mitigate risks on. For example, hiring people in the areas of cybersecurity, what we can do in terms of contracts, etc. So there's a dialogue, I would say, that is very narrow. But we've been pushing for a more intense dialogue for several years. Thank you very much. In your speech, you also mentioned that there were businesses on almost every sector of activity that have been compromised and have suffered losses because of cyber attacks. And we could think probably, amongst others, of computer and artificial intelligence businesses. And I'd like to know if the Chinese People's Liberation Army plays a role in this. Thank you, Mr. Paulus. As you can imagine, I cannot provide certain details in this environment, but I can tell you that there is the government and agencies like CSIS that works to protect us against those threats. There are some states, you've mentioned China in the past, but some states use every tool at their disposal to come and seek out the secrets of Canada's advanced economy. So, well, if I'm asking you the question in a different way, perhaps could I ask if China has sophisticated methods that go beyond the defenses that Canada might have, or other Western countries? Well, there are several states that have very sophisticated tools on the human and technological levels to spy and to create interference. And we mentioned, yes, that China is one of those countries. There are several others, unfortunately, who not only have the capacity, but also the interest and the opportunity to come and spy in Canada. So the measures that we are taking, obviously, we have to try and block everything 100%. So this is a fight. And it's a bit of a cat and mouse game to try and find the next spot where information might be stolen from. But that's what we are doing with our various partners through the Canadian government. Thank you, Mr. Vigneault. Ms. Lucky, in terms of the RCMP, some Canadians have been attacked and threatened or harassed over the internet. So what kind of infrastructure and what kind of computer capacity do you have to investigate online this kind of crime?
Anytime that there's any type of threat to people through intimidation, we ask them to report that through the police of jurisdiction. Obviously, if they're an immediate threat, we would ask that they call 911 if it's grievous. And otherwise, like I had mentioned in the previous meeting, we have a 1-800 number that we work through. We also do some monitoring on the social media to ensure that people, when there is such things as threats on the social media platforms, we follow up with those and we work with that.
How many agents do you have in Canada who are dedicated to investigating online crime?
Investigate touch on the cyber portion of the investigations, but they aren't specific to cyber crime specifically.
Okay. Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Vigneault, did you brief the minister on the Uyghur genocide? Thank you, Mr. Paulus. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose anything about my discussions with the minister, but obviously this is an issue we're well aware of. Thank you very much, Mr. Paulus.
And now we go to Mr. Prajus for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the officials for your work, for being here tonight. It is deeply appreciated. A question to the CBSA. Tell us about the work that is being done to prevent fentanyl from coming into Canada from China.
Thank you for the question, Chair. So obviously we work with all of our partners here in terms of looking for leads to help us target shipments that might be coming into the country. Working with the Chinese government, the RCMP had reached out a couple of years ago and looking to list certain precursor chemicals. Unfortunately, folks are fairly creative and they're looking for new ways to create this stuff all of time. My lab, which actually examines the stuff that we seize, at one point a few years ago was finding a new analog every 2 weeks. So it's something that is as my colleague just said, a cat and mouse game. We're always looking for things. We've done things with investments in terms of designated examination facilities at the ports of entry so we can get very quick analysis of something. But continue to look for precursor chemicals, and obviously we've had some success. In fact, in 2020 we've seized 5.8 kilograms of fentanyl, which is about 2.9 million fatal doses. So the seizures go up and down all the time, but with the rise of e-commerce, we're paying particular attention to that particular routing.
Mr. Osowski, do you have figures to compare what has been seized since the government put in place stronger measures a few years back, I believe under Minister Goodale at that time, and compare that to what the situation was before those reforms?
I'd have to go back. I can certainly provide a written report on that. And if you're referring to when the legislation came in for under 30 grams to open mail and pill presses.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, I can go back and provide that report.
That would be great if you tabled that with the committee.
Okay.
I'll ask this. I believe it's probably placed with the CBSA, although others might want to put their point of view forward as well. How can Canadians be assured that goods and other products that are being produced in the Xinjiang region of China are not entering Canada? Obviously, there's deep concerns about the ongoing genocide. There's concerns about forced labor. Obviously the government has acted, and Minister Blair spoke to this last week. I just want more information if you could enlighten the committee on that.
Certainly. So first of all, as I think I recall mentioning at the previous committee's appearance, we started with this as a result of the Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement last summer. The first thing we needed to do was work with our colleagues in ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada, to put the legal framework in place for us to allow the sharing information properly. And I really underline the importance of having those good processes in place to make sure that we have defensible decisions at the end of the day. So we've been working with that legal framework. One complaint has been received. Unfortunately, didn't have any evidence associated with it. But we're building that capacity right now, working with the other partner departments on this one to do exactly as you say.
Time for one more question, Mr. Chair. Our universities, we frequently hear concerns about the security of our universities, the scientific work that takes place at our universities, and whether that is subject to interference of some type. How do officials feel about the security of work that is being done by researchers on campus at the present time?
I'm not sure who you're directing the question to.
I'm directing it to officials. I think there's overlapping areas here, but perhaps I'll put it to CSIS if you want to be specific.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fredjis-Katas. We are obviously, as I mentioned earlier in my answer to Mr. Paulus, we're quite involved. Yes, CSIS, but also our partners in the national security community are involved with universities to provide them with advice. We are working closely as well, not just on the protection of research, but also on working with them on the potential interference on campuses in terms of academic freedom and potential threats that the students coming from abroad may feel from different countries. So we have an array of different threats that we are concerned with on campuses, and we are engaging with different levels. Some of it is done, bilaterally. Some of it is done through committee work. But I would say that this is an area that, in a country like Canada, where advanced universities, cutting-edge research that is taking place is very attractive for a number of actors who may have ill intent.
Is there an appreciation, would you say, Mr. Vigneault, on the part of universities that this particular Chinese regime is entirely of a different nature of regimes in the past?
I can obviously not speak for all universities, but I can say that this is an ongoing discussion, and I could see that there is a different dialogue that we're having over the last year or two with universities. So I think what we're realizing is that, like everybody else, there is a new intent in the regime in China.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fredjis-Katas. Et maintenant, Monsieur Bergeron, pendant.
And now Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I'll ask an easy question to start of Ms. Lucky. Do we have a 1-800 number that Canadians and Quebecers could call if they feel that they are the subject of pressure by representatives of the People's Republic of China?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, I didn't have the number the last time I was here, but it is a 1-800-420-5805, and it's displayed on both our public main RCMP page and the National Security website. And we get on average, it's actually been fairly effective. We get on average 120 tips per day. and we follow up obviously with all of them. We find that it's probably noteworthy that as the volume of the tips increase, the threat percentages significantly decline. Sorry? I just heard somebody asking a
Please proceed,
question.
Mr. Bergeron.
Sorry.
I was just saying that I didn't have time to know the number. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, excusez-moi, c'est
I'm sorry, it's 1-800-420-5805. Thank you very much. If I may, Mr. Chairman, it's because we can't hear you in the hall here, in the room. You have to have an earpiece, and I realized that I couldn't hear anything, so I put the earpiece on, but you had already read out the number at that point in time, so I apologize. In an appearance on the 22nd of February before the Immigration Committee of this House, VFS Global stated that there are two parts of verification of security for employees that have been hired in Beijing, and one part of it is taken care of by BFS itself, and another component is dealt with by the government of that country, or the government of the country with which the contract is being signed. And in our case, obviously, that would be Canada. So who at home is carrying out these checks of security clearances for employees of the business? And I'm sorry, I don't have the name in front of me. Wait a minute, I have it here. The Beijing Shuangjun Coin Service Company, that is the business that is a subcontractor working with the VFS for visa applications in Beijing.
If the question's directed to me, I cannot speak directly to that company. I can only speak to what we do from an RCMP point of view on all contracts, and we review them to determine the appropriate level of security of the contract and the company and the related employees.
Je veux pas vous interrompre, Madame Lucky.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, Ms. Lucky, but are you responsible for checking on security clearances of employees that are subcontracted in Beijing? If not you, who is in charge of checking those security clearances? Because according to VFS, there is a check that's done in Canada. So who is responsible for that here in Canada?
I can't answer that question. I can only talk in relation to RCMP specifically. Public Works also has an agreement with us, though, to conduct law enforcement record checks in support of their mandate. So we may, in fact, do some of that on their behalf, but I can't speak specifically to the area you're speaking about.
C'est très intéressant parce que
It's very interesting because VFS is telling us that there's a verification component that is carried out in Canada. And Ms. Michelle Larose, who's the spokesperson for Public Services and Procurement Canada, in an article printed in the Globe and Mail or published in the Globe and Mail a few days ago, stated that it's VFS alone who carries out these checks on the staff that are subcontracted and not the federal government. So are we to understand that VFS, which is funded by a Chinese investment firm, is the only entity able to check on security clearances of employees working for on visa emissions or visas in Beijing? Mr. Bergeron? Thank you, Brenda. You're raising an important issue here, but I think that it will be necessary to respond to you in writing. All right, excellent. I find it interesting as well that Mr. Richard Fadden, Mr. Vignal's predecessor, stated to the Globe and Mail recently that an entity of the Chinese government having a connection with immigration in Canada is a way for cyber spies to get into Canada. So I see that I'm running out of time, but I'll certainly have the opportunity to come back and ask this question of Mr. Vigneault later on. So you have a little heads up, Mr. Vigneault. You'll be able to prepare for that answer. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Good timing. And now?
Mr. Harris for 6 minutes. Mr. Harris, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And let me follow up briefly on Mr. Bergeron's questions. We did have questions about this when the minister was before us, and we talked about who in the security service had approved the use of this particular subcontractor in the visa services in Beijing. And the minister advised that this was all done before this government's time back in 2012. But I understand that these contracts have been renewed since then, particularly in 2018, I believe 2015 as well, and would have required some due diligence to be undertaken at that time. So can I ask whether any of the agencies present were involved in any way in carrying out these due diligence efforts to ensure that the contracts that were being renewed were in compliance with security concerns? I'm taking silence as nobody present can answer
Mr.
that
Harris,
question.
it's David Vigneault from CSIS. We are not in a position to provide specific details of exactly how and on what we provide advice, but I can assure you and Canadians that, CSIS and other security partners, we are involved in the process of providing security and threat advice to government agencies on an ongoing basis. We do that to make sure that, the proper authorities can then determine what would be appropriate mitigation measures to take place. And we try to do this work on an ongoing basis because the threat continues to evolve.
Yeah, I understand that. And I understand that the answer that was given the last time was that we do it when asked. And so my question then would be, were any of the agencies were asked to participate in any security check with respect to the visa contract in Beijing and since 2015, shall we say, in 2018 or any other time since 2012?
Mr. Harris, from a CSIS point of view, I can unfortunately not provide you with specific details of how and when we have provided this advice, but I can tell you that we are engaged with our partners at Immigration, PSPC, and others across the government to provide advice on security threats, to allow our partners to develop appropriate mitigation measures.
That's a very general comment, but the question was whether or not your agency had provided any security information or security advice with respect to the visa application center in Beijing. Can you answer yes or no to that, please? I know you respond when asked, but that question that was before the committee the last time was about whether or not something happened or not, and we got a very passive answer, which was not of much comfort, as I pointed out, and I don't think you're giving me much more comfort now. Can you answer the question, yes or no?
Unfortunately, Mr. Harris, I cannot provide specific details of the type of advice and on what subject we are providing to our partners.
So you sound to be hiding behind the fact that you can't tell us whether you gave advice about this or not. Was your agency in a position to do that? Was there any opportunity for you to do that?
Mr. Harris, I've mentioned that we have been working with IRCC and PSPC in the context of many different ventures, and we have been providing advice to agencies. Unfortunately, I cannot provide you with a specific in this open context.
Well, that's a very obtuse and answer, sir, and I thought the minister was much more forthcoming the last time to suggest that nothing had been done, and we were told that we were only done when asked, and nobody had asked. So I don't know why that can't be repeated here tonight, if in fact it is indeed true. Let me turn to another question, because I think this question of foreign, we're talking about foreign interference, we talk about foreign influence, we talk about espionage. Perhaps you're the best person to answer this question, Mr. Vigneault, because of the nature of your agency's work. Can you distinguish between foreign influence, foreign interference, and espionage? They seem to be talked about in a different way. And is there a hierarchy here of what might be legal, what makes it illegal, and what makes it subject to the prosecution? Could you try that one, or is there someone else better able to answer that?
I can speak to, from a CSIS point of view, our act speaks to foreign influence as a threat. But colloquially, this is what what most people will be considering foreign interference. And that is, using covert and coercive means to try to accomplish an objective. And so this is when we have those characteristics of coercive and covert approach. This is when CSIS can intervene and can investigate the threat to national security. As you probably know, Mr. Iris, we, CSIS, do not lay charges or take enforcement actions. But you're absolutely right to say that foreign influence and espionage is part of a continuum. Interference, and is when you have those elements of coercion and
excuse me, sorry about that, but Mr. Harris's time is up, and I have to go on now to the second round and to Mr. Williamson for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for returning. Commissioner, you were about to give us, I think, some interesting indications of the tip line when I think you were not able to complete your thought. This was about the 120 tips a day, and you were just about to say, as calls have increased, the percentage of, and we didn't hear the rest of your statement. Could you just finish that up for us, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Basically, what I was going to say was noteworthy that as the volume of the tips increase, the threat percentage significantly declines. And what I mean by that is that significantly less tips are deemed relevant to national security or to law enforcement matters. We examine them all. We tend to get a lot of tips on there that aren't relative to the national security or law enforcement. So those are not followed up from our agency. If they are applicable to any other agency, we would pass that on. But some of it is just information that people feel they might feel, for example, a threat, and if it doesn't meet the threshold of a criminal offense, then we normally can't deal with it in that sense.
Okay, I might come back to that, but let me ask you first: when you look into these cases and the cases that are investigated further, is this threats coming from members of the diplomatic corps, from visitors without any official standing here from a mission, or from other Canadians?
Oh, unfortunately, I don't have the statistics on where they are generated from. I just simply have the number of tips that we have received on those lines. So,
could you provide maybe kind of a broader, maybe speak to them? I mean, is the tendency more likely to be someone from a diplomatic mission, a visitor, or a citizen?
If we did have that information, I couldn't share that with you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Now you mentioned if the calls aren't related to national security or law enforcement. So we'll put aside national security for a second. What are the parameters of kind of a threat to I think you said law enforcement, or maybe you just said the law. What would those kind of infractions look like where an investigation would continue?
Well, sometimes if they don't reach the realm of national security, we might pass that information on to the police of jurisdiction if there was a criminal code, if it was a criminal code type of uttering threats or something like that. But if it isn't in the national security realm on that tip line, it would be referred to the police of jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you. A question for Mr. Vigneault from CSIS. Could you, and thank you, Chair. I'm just going to make a comment about something that my colleague, Mr. Harris, said, where he was suggesting if what the minister had said was true the other day, why can't it be repeated? I would perhaps suggest that perhaps it was not true. He was busy finger pointing to a previous government and not dealing with the problem in front of him. What department would we speak to if we wanted to have answers around this immigration office in Beijing, which is being operated by the police authorities of a foreign country? Is it immigration? Who would we talk to about the operation of that facility?
I'm looking at my colleague, Mr. Stewart. If you want to take the question, I can. What I can tell you. You go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. No. The contract is overseen by and under the auspices of the Public Services and Procurement Department. But they work hand in glove with the department who is the beneficiary of the contract, and that is IRCC. Okay. So the two of them together would provide a response to any question concerning the contract.
Okay. Mr. Chair, do I have 30 seconds?
20.
20, okay. Is anyone able to say they believe Huawei should be permitted to operate in Canada? Don't need a long why they shouldn't, but who has confidence that Huawei should be allowed to operate in this country? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And your time is up. Thank you very much, Mr.
I had a great
Williamson.
answer.
And we'll go on maintenant, Monsieur Dubourg, pendant 5 minutes.
Now, Monsieur Dubourg for 5 minutes. Mr. Dubourg. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's the same issue. I hadn't turned my microphone on. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the witnesses for being here this evening and to thank them for coming back to speak with us. I also understand that we're talking about national security and public safety. It's more difficult for our witnesses to really delve into the details, but we're just looking for some reassurance that Canadians are well protected. Since we began the meeting tonight, we've seen questions concerning someone who might receive threats, for example, or dealing with immigration issues. Let's start with that. I'd like to know, at the end of last year, I believe it was in December, Minister Mendicino presented some measures to attract students and also to facilitate permanent residency. And I think that Mr. Osowski is well aware of this file. I would like to know, since that announcement was made, if the program's functioning well, and if there are any problems in the area of security related to these people who decide to come and establish themselves in Canada.
Thank you for the question, Chair. So our role with respect to those programs that are administered by IRCC is to do the security screening. So anyone that applies for a permit, permanent residency, temporary resident visas, we would work with our other security partners to provide the assurance that there's no security issues that they need to be concerned of. I would just say that since those announcements were made, obviously the travel restrictions have made it so that people aren't actually arriving in the country. So the work is continuing behind the scenes. And once we get past that place, then the people that we have no concerns with would be allowed to enter the country.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Osowski. That's true with the pandemic. But let's get back to the security aspect of this. The first questions asked by my colleagues concerning someone who feels threatened. Madam Commissioner Lucky, you said that there have been moments where you receive 120 tips a day, and you even spoke about the fact that if that information really concerns the police, you refer that information to them. But I'd like to hear you say if this system is really well integrated, this security system, if you're receiving the first tips, if the whole security system works well together and is integrated to protect Canadians?
What I can say is outside of the tip line, we have an integrated approach to national security. So we work very closely with CSIS, we work with CSC, we work with, of course, CBSA and the cyber side with the Cyber Security Center. And we do our utmost to be integrated. We have meetings together. We share information when possible. At the working level, often there are people working side by side and they are embedded together in the same offices. So that's to make sure that there's a seamless transition so that these investigations, because everybody's got sometimes pieces of the same puzzle and we have to make sure that we share those. And that's the integrated approach that we use.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour cette.
Thank you very much. I wanted to hear you say it because I worked, as you know, I've already met several of you when I was at NCCOP, so I know how things work. But as we're in a public meeting here, and NCCOP and other agencies don't always have the ability to reassure Canadians, I wanted to hear you say that directly, to what degree these security measures are in place to protect Canadians. And Mr. Chairman, perhaps I'll have the opportunity to come back a bit later because you're showing me a signal that I don't have any time left. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Dubourg. And we'll go now for 2 minutes and 30 seconds to Mr. Bergeron. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm counting on you, Mr. Stewart, that we will receive written responses that were promised at the last meeting and also again today. So, Mr. Vigneault, what do you make of this statement made by your predecessor that Immigration Canada deals with an entity that's part of the Chinese government that is really assuring the entry of potential cyber criminals here? And as a second question, if I may, I imagine that you're aware that VFS was the subject of leaks of personal information in Great Britain in 2015. So did this information draw the attention of Canadian authorities as to whether or not they should continue to do business with VHF, and we renewed their contracts in 2017. And finally, the Prime Minister announced on the 9th of February that there was an investigation underway to see where we were at with this process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Bergeron, for the question. It's very clear that the Chinese government has several vectors that can lead to the interception of information. Sophisticated states around the world have many ways to seek out information through cyber spying, and there's a human factor in the chain of transmission as well. So it's that kind of information that we must understand, and we give information of the threats to our partners, and they have to determine what the best mitigation steps are that are possible. So we work closely with them, and we work closely with intelligence partners around the world. It's always a very complex event for us, and that is why we work very closely with our partners. Your question, Mr. Bergeron, on VFS and the leak, I'm sorry, I think it's probably the Department of Immigration that could better answer that question, so I apologize for that. 10 seconds. And for the, someone could speak to what the Prime Minister said about the process? Can someone enlighten me? No? Unfortunately, your time is up.
For 2.5 minutes, Mr. Harris, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a question. I guess it's first of all directed towards the community communication security establishment, and I'm referencing the December 2018 CSE press release relating to China's Ministry of State Security being behind a 2016 compromise of what was called managed service providers in Canada and elsewhere. Can you first of all tell me, when you're referring to managed service providers, who are you referring to? And then whether or not the Chinese Ministry of State security breach actually resulted in access to client data stored by these providers?
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. CSE has two main roles that are very complementary, and one of them is in the foreign intelligence side, where we do look for the motivations, intentions, capabilities, and the activities of foreign actors, including foreign cyber threat actors, whether they're state or non-state. And we also have the mandate to act as the cybersecurity center for the government of Canada and raise that cybersecurity bar.
Can you be more specific about the question, please? I only have a very limited time, and I'm looking for some answers that might be helpful.
I'm sorry, yes. Of course, those two mandates come together to put us in a position where we can see certain things. And when it makes sense with the government, we can attribute certain activities to actors that would otherwise go undetected. I have with me today the head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, who can talk a little bit more about managed service providers and what role they play in the supply chain and the ecosystem for different organizations.
But I'd like to know about this particular investigation and the result of it. If Mr. Jones is here, I guess if he can provide that information.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think what we, when we're talking about managed service providers, it's really the people that many companies rely upon to provide those services, which makes them a very lucrative intelligence target. And in the case that you're mentioning, where the government chose to do an attribution, it was to draw attention to the fact that this had been done and had led to significant compromises around the communities, around companies around the world. And this is something we joined in with our allies to both advise in terms of how to raise the bar, but also to raise awareness, but also to draw attention to the fact that this was something that was of concern in terms of the breadth of the activity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris's time is up. Thank you, Mr. Jennis. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I believe Mr. Chong was to be ahead of me. Is that correct?
Sure. Sorry. Thank you. Pardon me.
Yeah,
I'll go to Mr. Chong in that case. Forgive me. Thank you very much.
My first question is for the Canadian Security Establishment. Last November, you said for the first time that you named China for the first time as one of the greatest strategic threats to Canada. You warned that they're developing cyber capabilities to disrupt our critical infrastructure. What is your view of Huawei Technologies Canada being allowed to build out the core of Canada's 5G telecommunications infrastructure?
Thank you very much for the question. At this point, the Communications Security Establishment is one of many organizations that are contributing to a government-wide study to assess.
I understand that. So my question then is, when will that study be completed?
This study is underway, and when the government is prepared to make a decision, then I'm sure the answer will be known to that. I don't know if
okay, because the previous Minister of Public Safety indicated in May of 2019 that a decision was going to be made before the 2019 election. He then indicated in July of that year that a decision would be made after the 2019 election. We're now a year and a half since the election and still yet no decision. So, people are wondering, how long is this study going to take? Because the government has continually said it's studying the issue. It's now been years since we've been studying it. I guess maybe a different way to ask the question is, has the CSE completed its study and it's just with the cabinet now for further study? Or is CSE and other elements of the Canadian security establishment still studying this?
As you can appreciate, it would be inappropriate for me to speak about advice and guidance that we're giving to the government on any of these matters.
Okay, so maybe a more specific question. What is your view of Huawei providing network switches for the core of the network that connects 4 national data centers under the Compute Canada Federation?
I can speak more broadly to the program that is running right now under the Security Review Program that really is related to the distribution of equipment and security in the 3G, 4G, and LTE space, if that's of interest, because there is
I'd like to get to the specifics of Huawei. Well, maybe I'll ask Mr. Vigneault of CSIS. Several years ago, Mr. Vigneault, I believe in 2018, in December 2018, you indicated that you warned of increasing state-sponsored espionage through 5G networks. While you didn't explicitly mention China, you identified 5G mobile technology as one of the 5 critical areas of threat that Canada is facing. Do you still hold that view?
I have, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Chong. We have been referring to a number of threats. The threat environment, unfortunately, is getting more complex, more complicated. A number of threat actors and their capabilities are increasing. And yes, any advanced technology and advanced communications networks is a lucrative target, as my colleague has said.
Okay.
And so we are indeed concerned about the integrity.
So one of the things that's a bit sort of confounding for us who are following this issue closely is that, we know that CSIS talks regularly to Canadian universities and business organizations about state-sponsored threats to Canada. And for example, last August, Canadian universities were warned about using Alibaba for Zoom-type technologies. Last August, they were also warned about the 1,000 Talents program. You've mentioned 5G as being a threat from foreign actors. Clearly, there's only one country and one company that is the embodiment of that threat. Yet last month, one of the elements of the Government of Canada, NSERC, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, awarded a almost $5 million grant to partner with Huawei in Canadian universities. NSERC says that it doesn't see a problem with the grant. Canadian universities have indicated that they've not been warned against working or collaborating with Huawei, that they've not received any direction or guidance from the federal government in this regard. So my question is, has CSIS given guidance to Canadian universities about the 5G threat?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chong. The CSIS is not in the business of giving guidance to universities. We work with them in collaboration. We provide them with as much information possible.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Chong's time is up, and I now go to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, everyone, for returning back to committee. Mr. Stewart, last week, Minister Blair acknowledged the rise of racism and violence directed towards Canadians of Asian descent purely because of their ethnicity. In your opinion, how important is it for public figures and communication products to avoid blanket statements and declarations that can marginalize entire communities?
I would not be in a position to share my opinion with the committee as I give advice to the minister, but I can represent the minister's view, which is that it is extremely important for Canadian public figures to emphasize that this is inappropriate behavior and it is divisive and dangerous to our society.
What can be done to reassure Asian Canadians to feel safe, especially in light of the rise of the anti-Asian racism of 715% in BC?
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Well, I was going to say it is a very important fact that when we talk about threat as it emanates from China, it's to be laid at the door of the government of China, not the people of China. So making that point and making it very clearly is very important. Commissioner?
Yeah, I was simply going to add that it's so important whether we're talking about a threat in the national security space or just a threat in general, which we've seen with the onset of COVID. It's so important for people to come forward and report that to their place of jurisdiction. I know in the Lower Mainland that is mostly the RCMP, and it's really important for people to feel that they can go to the police of jurisdiction and report it, because that's the only way we will be able to deal with it adequately.
Has there been a rise in investigations by the RCMP on this matter?
I can't say for sure specifically on intimidation. I know that COVID specifically, there's been a rise in mental health calls, and there's been a rise in domestic violence. But I haven't seen any statistics that show a rise in intimidation or threats.
I could perhaps add that the government has a anti-racism strategy of which public safety, the Department of Public Safety is a part, and the role we play there is in programming, providing grants and contributions to organizations to counter racism.
Are there specific programs towards the Asian community?
I can't answer that question, but I can answer you in writing.
I look forward to seeing your response. So Ms. Lucky, you have mentioned that it's important for people to report the incidences. However, some Asian Canadians feel that they can't come forward because they feel that their statements are not, I don't want to say not taken seriously, but it's not, I guess, effective in terms of what the police would be looking for, or the RCMP. Can you provide some clarification on that?
Yes, well, I can say that we take every complaint of threats and intimidation seriously. And obviously, if they need, in our space, it's about the criminal code infractions. So it's important that it meets that threshold. If people fear, and of course, with intimidation and threats, there's always a fear attached to those types of crimes. But we do have, for example, Crime Stoppers. We do have the tip line. It's very important because sometimes people just don't feel safe to be able to report those. And that's why we have those anonymous type of areas where they can, or they can go through the tip line and be not anonymous if they'd like, so they don't have to go to a police station, for example.
Has there been an increase in foreign interference investigations by the RCMP?
I won't say specifically because it's very hard. What happens is these are not investigations that people call in. These are self-generated, usually investigations where we get certain spaces of information and we proactively would go and investigate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but
thank you.
This concludes Ms. Yip's time, and this concludes our first panel. We'll need a few minutes to switch over to bring in our next guest and test his sound. So I want to, on behalf of the members of the committee, thank all the witnesses very much for your appearance this evening. And we'll suspend for 2 minutes while we get the changeover. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
I'd like to welcome as an individual Dr. Scott Halperin. Dr. Scott Halperin is a professor of pediatrics, microbiology, and immunology at Dalhousie University. a university I know well, and Director of the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology. Thank you for being here tonight. Please proceed with your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to your committee. In addition to those descriptions of what I do, I'm the nominated principal or co-principal investigator for 2 national networks relevant to vaccine research. The first is IMPACT, which is the Immunization Monitoring Program Active, which is a Public Health Agency of Canada funded surveillance network administered at 12 of the country's pediatric tertiary care hospitals, and undertakes surveillance for selected vaccine preventable or soon to be vaccine preventable infectious diseases and adverse events following immunization severe enough to require hospitalization. The second network is the Canadian Immunization Research Network called CERN. And CERN is organized as a network of networks comprised of 8 subnetworks and does a broad range of vaccine-related surveillance and research. One of these subnetworks is the Clinical Trials Network, which has been involved in clinical trials related to the candidate COVID-19 vaccines. My experience related to this committee's mandate on Canadian-Chinese relations is really restricted to a collaboration with a single Chinese vaccine manufacturer of a candidate COVID-19 vaccine. And this is what I will describe, since I imagine that's the reason why I was asked to present to the committee. In mid-March of 2020, so exactly 1 year ago this week, I was asked to join a meeting with the National Research Council and CanSino Biologics about my center, which is called the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology, or CCFV, and our network CERN, partnering with NRC and CanSino to undertake a phase 1 clinical trial in Canada for their adenovirus vectored COVID-19 vaccine candidate. This vaccine had just finished enrollment of a phase 1 study in China, and preliminary safety information was soon going to be available. There was a plan to undertake a second follow-on phase 1 study in Canada to expand information generated from the first phase 1 trial and to continue with the development of the vaccine in Canada following a meeting scheduled with Health Canada regulatory authorities. The plan was, if demonstrated to be safe and effective by Canadian regulatory authorities, for the vaccine to be manufactured in the NRC's facility in sufficient quantity to contribute to Canada's vaccine needs. A meeting with Health Canada regulators, NRC, CanSino, and CCFV took place at the end of March, and guidance around the design of that phase 1 study was received. A protocol for the phase 1 study was developed, and several weeks later, in a follow-up meeting with Health Canada, further guidance was obtained. And based on that meeting, further modifications to the protocol were undertaken, and the protocol was approved on May 15th. Arrangements were then made for the vaccine to be shipped from China to Halifax, where CCFV is located, on May 19th. The vaccine moved from the company in China to the airport to be stored in a secure temperature-controlled facility, awaiting clearance for one of the flights that took place several times a week at that time from China to Toronto. Over the next several weeks, we were told which flights it would be on, and then told the vaccine had not made it on the flights because of lacking customs clearance. During this period, CanSino executives met with various Chinese government officials to determine what the problem was and what was needed to be done to get the approvals that they needed for exporting the vaccine from China. They were told various things, various forms that they were supposed to complete, and they continued to complete whatever paperwork they were asked to provide. Weeks later, in June, they were told that the Chinese government was setting up a new committee to review and approve any vaccines shipped out of the country, and that CanSino's approvals would be part of this new process, which was going to be used for all vaccines from any company in China. They continued to meet with government officials, but were not able to find out what the delay was. The company, and we were assured by the company, that the delay was not political in nature, but rather was bureaucratic. Because of these delays, the phase 1 trial that we had been planning was becoming increasingly irrelevant, as by this time, later in June and July, phase 2 trial data became available from studies that were being done in China. While we were continuing to work on getting the vaccine shipped to Canada, we assisted in design of their phase 3 clinical trial, which would evaluate the efficacy of the vaccine. This trial, the phase 3 trial, was planned for multiple countries around the world where the rates of COVID-19 vaccine disease were high.
Doctor, forgive me, I have to stop you because we're at the 5-minute point and I have to get to members for their questions. I'm guessing that the opportunity from those questions for you to complete your thoughts there. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Maintenant, on va au premier tour.
And now the first turn will be Mr. Paulus for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope that this will go well. My internet connection is not very stable. Mr. Halpern, your testimony is most interesting, what we've heard up until now at least. Can you hear me, Mr. Halpern? Mr. Paulus, I can hear you well.
Mr. Paulus, you have the interpretation, Dr. Halpern?
I do now. I had it on before, but
okay.
I guess when I relogged in, it didn't come back.
Okay, Monsieur Paulus,
Okay, Mr. Paulus, could you restart your question, please? Okay, thank you. So start again. Thank you, Mr. Halpern, for the information that you have provided. It's very important for us. We were coming to dates that really are the concern of my question, or the subject of my question. We know that on the 28th of June, 2020, it was the vaccine was approved in China for military use. Were you informed at the end of the month of June that the Chinese army was in communication with CACN?
We were informed, I was informed that, yes, that the vaccine was going to be used for emergency use authorization prior to the end of the clinical trials that we were planning by the Chinese military.
Est-ce que vous avez été surpris?
Were you surprised to learn that the military, that China, I mean, we're trying to understand this. The government was told that this wasn't a political issue to prevent the shipment of these vaccines to Canada, but at the same time, we're seeing that the Chinese government and the Chinese military has a direct relationship with CACN, and that in June 25th of 2020, they vaccinated entire units, and we found ourselves with no cooperation at all. So were you surprised at their actions at that point in time?
I think those were two different issues. One was we were attempting to get the vaccine in order to do clinical trials to obtain more information about the use of those vaccines. And as you're aware, those vaccines before emergency use would be used in the general population needed to go through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies before emergency authorization would be approved for general population, certainly in Canada and elsewhere. We're definitely surprised anytime that a vaccine is authorized for use before any of those data are available, whether it be in China, or similarly surprised when that occurred in Russia with the Russian vaccine, which was also authorized for general usage after only phase 2 studies and not until phase 3 studies had even begun.
Okay. Notre étude actuellement,
Our current study is on national security, and I would like to know, when you began to have that relationship with CACN, were there Chinese entities in Canada who spoke to you about the links that CACN might have with Chinese authorities?
When we started having discussions with CACN, it was with both NRC, the National Research Council, and CACN. And our interactions were with the company who was in the business of undertaking clinical trials to show the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. The interaction between that company and the government was not really an issue that I was looking at.
Okay.
Okay, but you're aware that the founders of CACN, the interpreter regrets, but part of the question was inaudible. The video has faded out a little bit.
So I was, the interpreter was not able to.
Okay. Je vais répéter donc.
I'll repeat. The question was that, do you know that the founders of CACN had been assessed as being part of what the plan, part of the plan of 1,000 talents? Were you aware of this about CACN?
No, I was not aware of that program. I was aware that the founders had previously worked in Canada at Sanofi Pasteur and had then gone back to China to start that company. But I was not aware of their program.
Okay. Just pour compléter that.
Just to wrap up, I just want to make sure I understood correctly what you said at the outset. You said that you were informed on the 15th of May 2015 that there would be no shipment of CACN products to Canada. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. I was informed that the shipment that was scheduled for that day was not coming, but not that vaccines. It wasn't until August that we found that there would not be shipments of vaccine to Canada. Up until that point, the dates of scheduling them kept rolling back and back and back until finally the vaccine had to be shipped back from the airport to the company while they continued to try to get the process for release of them through customs. But it wasn't until August that we finally decided that, based on the fact that shipments had gone to other countries, that it was not it was a unique problem of shipping to Canada, not just to exporting. Once we saw that the vaccines were shipped for the phase 3 studies to Pakistan, we decided that suggested it was a political issue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Paulus. And now,
thank you very much, Mr. Paulus.
Please.
Thank you very much. And I first want to say welcome, Dr. Halpern. It's so nice to have you here on our committee. And of course, I'm coming to you from Truro, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. As a proud Nova Scotian, I'm really happy to have you here in your capacity as the Director of Vaccinology. And of course, we do have the Ag Campus of Dalhousie here in Truro. So, as you know, global partners have come together to learn about COVID-19 and do research about the factors of transmissibility, for instance, and new variants of concern and the lasting effects. So could you tell us, please, about that collaboration and why it's so important to have a global response to infectious diseases such as COVID-19?
It's very important. I mean, it's a truism, but a worn out truism, but viruses don't respect borders, and we really need to have a collaboration. So when variants are become apparent in any jurisdiction anywhere in the world, that they're very quickly shared so that they can be sequenced, and that if revised vaccines need to be made, and they need to be done very quickly. And there's an incredible amount of data sharing and materials sharing around the world that we didn't see 20 years ago or 10 years ago with previous pandemics, including the routine influenza pandemics. So I think it's incredibly important to have that type of collaboration around the world in order to make sure that we have very early warnings so that we can develop interventions that are effective.
Thank you. There's a lot of disinformation about vaccines, as you know, that may cause some Canadians to be hesitant about getting vaccinated. So can you tell us some more about the work that goes into evaluating vaccine candidates for use in Canada and expand a little bit on the COVID-19 vaccines and why they're safe and effective?
Yeah, I mean, Canada has one of the most rigorous regulatory authorities in the world. And any vaccine, before it gets to the widespread use in a population, has to undergo a series of clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 studies with increasing number of people in them that look for safety and efficacy. And prior to being released, they need to be studied in thousands of people. And these current COVID trials have had over 30 to 40,000 people in all of them before they get to the point of emergency authorization. Even at that stage, a study of 30 or 40,000 is not going to detect adverse events that occur in more than 1 in 1,000 people. So if you want to have assure the safety of even for more rare adverse events, one needs to have post-use surveillance within the country. And Canada has developed a very rigorous augmented surveillance system in order to look at COVID-19 vaccines as these vaccine programs roll out. Safety is one of the most important things that people are concerned about in terms of hesitancy, and people are hesitant for a variety of reasons. That's normal. It's expected. We want people to want to know about vaccines before they receive them, and we need to be able to provide them the type of information they need, how they want the information, and by whom they want the information in order to make sure that we get the highest rates of vaccine uptake.
Well, thank you. I want to say I'm very proud of your work, and I'm probably going to get cut off any second here, but do you have a second to talk about immunity, your research on immunity, particularly in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most important issues that we're facing now is to know these vaccines. They were licensed for use. They were authorized for emergency use with information up to about 3 months. And obviously, we want a vaccine that lasts longer. So there's a lot of work that's being ongoing now to look at duration of protection and what we call vaccine effectiveness as we're rolling them out in the real world situation to monitor for vaccine effectiveness over time, so that we can look at the durability of the immune response, as well as the immune response to the variants that are emerging.
Great. Yeah, again, I want to say I'm very proud of the work that you're doing. And I think that here in Nova Scotia, we've done a great job of looking after the people so that nobody's getting COVID, or very few. Here in the Northern District, we've been very lucky as well in our long-term care homes. Nobody's gotten COVID that we know of, and they've been very good at locking down the homes at the very, very beginning of the pandemic and making sure that nobody comes in and makes people sick. I was going to say, I just wanted to give also to ask you about Dr. Alice Aiken, who I posted about for International Women's Day. She's one of your colleagues, and I think she's done incredible work as well. So what kind of security briefings, if any, is the Canadian Centre of Vaccinology's scientists receiving regarding foreign threats to sensitive intellectual property that they create?
We do have had interactions with security briefings, and I've met with a representative from CSIS on multiple occasions. I've got his direct line if I ever have a concern or question.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry, that's the conclusion of Ms. Zan's time.
Thank you.
Dois maintenant passer à Monsieur
And we'll now give the floor to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes. Indeed, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Halpern, for being with us today. You've been cut off twice now in your answers, so if you would like to take advantage of my first minute of time to complete your thought, I would be really pleased to offer that to you, and I might have a couple of questions to ask you after that.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say that I do have a direct access to the experts at CSIS, and they have my number, and they call me on a routine basis to get any updates and discuss both general security issues and also to discuss my center's interaction with CACN Biologics.
Et quant à vos
And for what you were trying to complete with your opening statement, would you like to complete that? or had you said what you want to say since then?
Yeah, I think mostly I was just going to complete that timeline, and if there are any specific questions about my continued interaction with CAN-SINO, I'd be happy to discuss those further if there's any interest in that.
Ben justement,
Well, yes, indeed. I understand that this partnership with CAN-SINO was negotiated under a partnership with the National Research Council of Canada, and that CAN-SINO, in a rather unusual way, decided not to transfer the samples that normally should have been sent to you. And you said earlier that you believed that it was for political reasons. So could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Yeah, the decision not to ship the vaccine to Canada was not made by CAN-SINO. They were not able to get export agreement, and it became clear during the month of August that this had nothing to do with just bureaucratic paperwork, because as I was mentioning when I was cut off, that vaccine was then cleared to be shipped out of China to Russia and to Pakistan, and then to eventually to Mexico, Chile, and Argentina, which was part of the phase 3 trials that we had designed. So it was clear that this was not just that CAN-SINO wasn't able to ship out of the country, but that it was specific to Canada. And that's when it became clear that it was political and that this was not something that was going to be solved by more paperwork. At that time, the NRC decided that the agreement that they had in order to manufacture the CAN-SINO vaccine in Canada made no sense because they weren't able to get the vaccine, so they ended that collaboration. In the meantime, we had designed the phase 3 study, the efficacy study that was going to be done globally. And we at CCFE continued to participate in the design and then the implementation of that study in other countries. The phase 3 study was never planned to take place in Canada because, very fortunately, our incidence of disease in Canada is really too low to have supported a phase 3 study.
Et justement, là, comme vous...
And as you are continuing to contribute to the phase 3 study for that vaccine, what can you tell us about it today? Are the studies and trials, do they appear to be convincing?
The study was the phase 3 study was implemented, began in September in Pakistan and Russia. Pakistan enrolled a large number of participants, and then it was also enrollment was started in Mexico, Chile, and Argentina. Pakistan and Mexico were the two countries that contributed to the most participants, volunteers to the study. It underwent an interim analysis, similar to the same type of analysis that was done, by the Pfizer vaccine that received a lot of press. Pfizer's vaccines interim analysis was in December. The CAN-SINO's was at the end of January, and it was reported to have a efficacy of over 70%. And based on those results, it received emergency authorization in Pakistan and in Mexico, and there are multiple other countries where that emergency authorization is also being reviewed by their regulators. And that vaccine is now being used in those countries under emergency authorization.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, M. Bergeron.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron.
25 secondes.
You have 25 seconds left. Okay, thank you.
5 secondes, alors on...
Thank you.
Mr. Harris, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I have to tell you, though, Chair, your voice comes in and out off and on, but I don't know why that is. It's not my earphone, so I'll guarantee you that. Thank you, Dr. Halpern, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Your work with CACN, am I right in assuming that your work on the phase 3 investigation, did that continue in terms of supervision of some of the phase 3 trials in Pakistan and Mexico, or am I reading too much into the notes I have here?
No, you're absolutely correct. I am the global principal investigator for that study. There are then principal investigators in each of the individual countries, but I'm the overall investigator, and it's my center that has the data team that's doing the data analysis and statistical analysis and reporting and providing those results to the regulatory authorities in all those countries.
And that would have been the case with respect to the phase 2 trials that were expected to be undertaken in Canada as well.
That's right. We would have done that for the phase 1 and phase 2 studies in Canada, and then we would have gone on to the phase 3 globally because, again, and the reason, of course, if we had done those trials and we could have gotten the vaccine here, then that would have been a vaccine that would have been available in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And that vaccine has now been approved in some other countries and is in use.
That's correct.
Tell me, I mean, you told us quite at some length of your the fact that you are well aware of the security considerations in dealing with research with foreign entities, and that you've been regularly in touch with CSIS and representatives. And I have to assume that there was no concerns raised about working with CACN in particular in respect to this project, development in Canada, whether it be the trials, the arrangement with NRC, and the plans for production as well in Canada. Is that correct?
And that's correct. I mean, the concerns would be actually more likely to be in the opposite direction. In other words, we have their data. They're the sponsor of the clinical trial. They're paying for the clinical trial, but the data is held in Canada. There's not a security concern that they may steal those data because they own those data. Their more concern was, I think there was more concern not on the company's standpoint, but on the Chinese government standpoint, that the data would be here in Canada and not in China.
And tell me, beyond that, in terms of the data, there's also always raised, of course, the question of intellectual property and that sort of thing. The data would be intellectual property, of course, but what about the vaccine itself? Was that the vaccine that you were being used for the trials within Canada or planned to use was all manufactured in China, I take it?
The plan had been that the initial vaccine that we would have received would have been from China, but that the NRC would receive the material, the starting material for the production of that. And once the NRC's facility was available, remembering that was at the very beginning before the NRC's facility was being upgraded, that as soon as the facility was upgraded, they could start manufacturing it to then supply the latter stages of the vaccine needs for the clinical trials in Canada.
And that would have involved a certain amount of technology transfer or intellectual property transfer to Canada for the purpose of being able to manufacture that product and ensure that it was quality standards and all of the things that go with that. And there was no difficulty with that either.
Not from the company's standpoint. That they were that was part of the agreement that they would be transferring that technology to Canada.
Mm-hmm. And so that, and I take it then, based on what you're telling us so far, your undertaking of research and your virology center for vaccinology rather is fully aware of the concerns that have been talked about from time to time in terms of research and the concerns that have been raised about potential for mitigating risks to intellectual property and all of that. You're aware. You seem to be fully aware of these dimensions of Canadian research being undertaken by your university. Am I right in assuming that?
That's correct, and we're certainly aware of those concerns.
And and has it ever been raised within your university that any other research activities or research partnerships have given rise to suspicions about concerns about security?
I'm not personally aware of any research that's being done in my university, certainly not in my center, that there were concerns that any of that information was being shared inappropriately with any foreign countries.
Mm-hmm. But you're the scientist, obviously, and you would be dealing with your colleagues in other universities as well on the issues related to your discipline and your research.
Pardon me, Mr. Harris. I'm sorry, your time is up. But thank you very much, and now it gives me an opportunity to.
I may get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Sorry about that. And thank you, Dr. Halperin. I'm coming to you from Bedford, so not very far away from you. Or also in Mi'kma'ki, obviously. So thanks so much for being with us tonight. I'll give you a moment to disconnect, and we've got to carry on this subcommittee. Mr. Jenis, you have a point of order?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I wonder if there is consensus among the committee to extend to give every party maybe an opportunity to ask one additional question. I know I know the bells are going to start ringing soon, but we've only had half an hour, which is fairly limited time for a witness. And
let me ask that question: is there any objection? Anyone who objects to giving a couple minutes each? I guess you're saying, Mr. Jenis?
Yeah, let's say 2 minutes each.
2 minutes each to each party. Anyone object to that? Not seeing any objection. Is it Mr. Jenis? Are you next or Mr. Chong?
No, Mr. Chong, I believe.
Very good. For 2 minutes, Mr. Chong. Please proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Halperin, for coming in front of us today. Would you collaborate with CACN in the future in light of the experience that you went through earlier last year?
I would absolutely still collaborate with them. It's been a very good collaboration with the individuals at CACN. I think before I got too far down the path, I'd want to make sure that if there was a vaccine that I needed, that we tested out to make sure that it could be shipped. So I didn't expend a lot of time and effort.
Do members of the Canadian, do entities of the Canadian security apparatus ever sit down with you and talk to you about threats and risks from coming from places like China when it comes to intellectual property or national security?
Yes, I have met with members of CSIS multiple times in the past year and a half, and went through.
Is that a formal process, or is that more ad hoc? They'll call you up and brief you, or is that a formalized process that you go through? Or
it's my interactions have been ad hoc, but as part of those conversations, I was told that they provide information routinely to the institutions where research is being done, particularly where they consider to be high risk research being done. And they had told me that they had met with members of my various institutions, the IT people in the institutions, about that risk.
Now, you're familiar with the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg, I assume.
Absolutely.
Were you surprised when those researchers were escorted out of that laboratory?
Sorry, Dr. Halperin, but we'll have to wait for that answer, I'm afraid, because 2 minutes is up. This is very short. Lightning round. Maintenant, Monsieur Lightbound, pendant 2 minutes.
Now, Mr. Lightbound for 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Halperin, for being here today. Mr. Chong took the line of questioning that I had in mind. According to your research, your experience in research, what is your level of confidence in these kind of foreign laboratories? And also, I might add, we have a program at Public Safety called Safeguarding Science, and there's a link there with these kinds of programs.
I mean, When we're the type of research that I'm doing, typically I'm not generating intellectual property. I'm evaluating intellectual property of other entities, and that's the same whether it be a domestic or a foreign country or manufacturer. So the type of work that I'm doing at this level is evaluative research. So I'm dealing with other people's intellectual property that rather than sharing intellectual property that we're generating. So it's a bit of a different situation than what you're talking about.
But I think my question was more the degree of awareness that foreign actors might have in the university world in this regard, in your world.
I mean, in my world, I think the interaction with foreign actors becomes more high on the priority list based on the type of research that we're doing. So that with COVID-19 vaccines, that became a higher priority, and that's where people have approached us to have these conversations. And most times we don't hear about that just because it doesn't seem to be an overall concern. It's targeted.
Thank you, Merci, Mr. Lightbound.
Thank you, Mr. Lightbound. Now, Mr. Bergeron for 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We know that under national security legislation in the Republic of China, most businesses have to cooperate with the regime in terms of transfer of information. Under the circumstances, did you not yourself, and as well as the Canadian security officials, were you not concerned that CACN could come and get information here without us being able to benefit in return, which seems to demonstrate, in fact, that CACN was not able to send the samples that should have been shipped to Canada? So in other words, what did they come and get here? And what did we gain from this exchange with CACN?
For the phase 1 study that ended up being canceled, they gained nothing and we gained nothing because we were not able to generate any data from the planned study because the study didn't go ahead because we couldn't get the vaccine. So for that study, it just turned out to be a waste of a lot of time on all parties because of the block of the export of the product.
And as to the concerns that you yourself or Canadian authorities might have had regarding the fact that this business might be coming here to get information, you're telling me that they didn't get anything. But upstream, were there any concerns in that regard?
No, because the type of information that they would have gained if the study had gone forward would have been information that they would have sponsored to generate. So it would have been clinical trial information.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'll give another version of my last question and hopefully shorten enough so that you can answer this time. Dalhousie is a member of the U15 group of Canadian research universities, and U15 and Universities Canada published in 2019 a document called Mitigating Economic and/or Geopolitical Risks in Sensitive Research Projects, a set of guidelines and risk mitigation tools developed in collaboration with Canada. Are you, sir, familiar with that particular document and it is used? Is it in use by your organization or your researchers are familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with it myself. I know that the university, any study that we do, the university screens it first, and any research we do has to be signed off by our research office, our vice president of research.
Does that include the kind of lens we're talking about here in terms of security and mitigation of risks?
I'm not sure. I can't answer that.
And were you aware of the kind of concern before you were engaged with CSIS in the last year and a half, as you pointed out? Were you aware of any of these types of problems or issues that were related to that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm certainly aware that there are state actors and particular countries that have been in concern. That's been in the news, and I follow that. So, although it's not a formal process that I'm aware of, I certainly am cognizant of and aware that in my interactions with any study sponsor, that I'm going to make sure that that we're not being taken advantage of in any way, and that we're not losing any information that that should not be that's not in the public domain.
Thank you, Dr. Halpern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris, and thank you so much, Dr. Halpern, for being with us this evening. I appreciate that very much. We'll let you go now and have a nice evening. And
Thank
now
you
I'm
very
going
much.
to ask members of the committee. I understand from the clerk, I get the impression the bells are ringing. Is that correct? So now we have, of course, the work plan and subcommittee report, but we can only go to that since the bells are ringing if there's unanimous consent to continue. So I ask, does anyone object to us to continuing for 15 minutes? Seeing no objections, would someone like to move the adoption of the subcommittee report and the work plan? Mr. Chong. And then I see Mr.
I move.
For that. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Bergeron.
Mr. Chairman, I had the opportunity to flag for my colleagues that I have concerns regarding this version that was sent to us. I don't think it quite corresponds to the conclusion that we had reached at the subcommittee. For example, I'm trying to find this in my papers here. I had proposed, I'll find the right version here. I had proposed that Mr. Cliff Hamilton, who is now connected to Mr. Cavillo, and be paired rather with Ting Chen Ling. And it seems that at the end, the clerk asked us if we were talking about Mr. Lin or Mr. Lee, and you, Mr. Chairman, understood that the answer was Mr. Lee, and that as a result, it's Mr. Lee who finds himself in another panel, and Mr. Lin has been sidelined. So it seems that you said that in any case, Mr. Bergeron is to propose a witness for the 9th meeting, and so he'll be able to suggest Mr. Lin at that point in time. So I don't want to be limited to proposing him for the 9th meeting just because he was left aside in the finalization of this report that was submitted to the committee members here tonight. So what I have proposed as a compromise, even though Mr. Hamilton is with Mr. Farigo and Mr. Juno Katsulia, I was proposing that we put Mr. Lin into that panel, made up of Paul Evans and Gordon Molden, who are also academics. And so if the committee agrees to integrate Mr. Lin into that group, which was proposed by our analyst, I think that we could agree on that. Thank you very much. I'm looking at my notes, and I have, I think, what Mr. Jennis proposed. And for meeting number 7,
what was planned originally for meeting number 5, plus Mr. Lee. So I understood clearly from Mr. Jennis that he said Mr. Lee then. That's what I wrote down in terms of Mr. Lee's name, that he would be in the 7th meeting. I don't have the work plan right in front of me, but I have Mr. Jennis next. Can you clarify or correct the situation here, Mr. Jennis?
Sure, thank you. I was looking for Mr. Lee to be invited in the 7th panel, and that is reflected in the work plan. But I have absolutely no objection to the proposal for Mr. Lin as well, or to the particular configuration proposed by Mr. Bergeron. So I don't think it's an either or. I say we should adopt what I understood to be Mr. Bergeron's proposed amendment. And Mr. Chair, I did just want to make one other general comment. We have this work plan. It's been agreed upon. Of course, there may be times when witnesses are not available, as we had tonight. There were some witnesses that it was agreed we would hear from. They weren't available. And I hope we have an understanding at the committee that we give our staff the flexibility to schedule those witnesses at a time when they are available. If they aren't available at a particular time, we may find, for instance, that the Minister of Defense is not available on Monday, but is available on Thursday. And I just hope that the work plan is adopted with the spirit of that kind of flexibility and understanding.
If the chair and the clerk had the permission of the committee for that, that would sound good, and we would carry on, I think, on that basis. Mr. Lightbound.
I agree with the list proposed by Mr. Bergeron, and also what Garnet has suggested. I think we need to have that flexibility to move our work forward. So no objections on our side. So Mr. Chung.
To that amendment to your motion, then. You are good. And does anyone object or disagree with this motion? Oh, Madam Clerk?
I have Monsieur Bergeron in the room.
Okay, Monsieur Bergeron.
Since there seems to be consensus, I won't add anything further. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. So I think that...
For that proposal. If not, I will consider the motion of the report of the subcommittee and the work plan as amended
Mr.
tonight.
Chair?
Yes,
I'm sorry
Ms.
to
Van.
interrupt. I can't hear you. I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to
why.
hold this closer. I don't know what this is my third headset. Maybe it's my. I don't think it's my computer. Maybe it is. It's a Surface
Your
from the
voice
house. But
keeps fading up. But
okay, I'm terribly sorry about that. I'm probably too loud now for the interpreters. But what I'm saying is that I consider the report, subcommittee, and the work plan as amended this evening to be adopted. And on that basis, I think we're ready to adjourn. That's all we have on the agenda tonight, I believe. So we'll see you all at the vote. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.